welcome to this public board session of Northumbria Healthcare Foundation Trust. We're covering the December outcomes, but actually we'll talk about a lot more, I guess, as the day progresses. So, welcome, but as usual, we start with apologies for absence. Not just one. Right. And declarations of interest, anything different from the norm? In good shape. Okay, and we've got minutes of the previous meeting before you on the 24th of November. Can we take them as a true record? Okay. Any matters arising that we're not going to discuss through the meeting? Okay, that's good. There's an action log associated with them, which I think is pretty clean. Got an education review to do, but that's not yet due. Okay. If you're happy with the action log, it says you've got to approve it. That's good. So a couple of words from me, I guess. We're in deep midwinter. Some of us think it might have passed, some of us think it might come again, which is what we really worry about, and we'll hear a bit about that during the day. But just at the top of the meeting, I guess, as a board, we should formally acknowledge the efforts of our leadership and our staff over the Christmas period and before Christmas indeed. If you remember, we had a very, very cold spell that ended up with a lot of trauma, unplanned trauma, coming through our system as well. I think we did astonishingly well, and encouragingly as we go forward, it looks as though we're recovering quite well from that too, and that's worthy of note. But deep thanks from the board and on behalf of the public for services to our community from the Trust. No question about that. December was difficult. We'll hear a bit more about that in detail. And you'll see in the details of the statutory reporting, we're still not quite where we want to be on things like cancer pathways and stroke pathways. We are recovering, but we're recovering from 2 years of COVID and everything that brought, and everything that's happened in between. COVID is still around, it's causing staff absentees, and that's destructive to us. And we've had high incidence of flu, especially over Christmas. So these things are normal, sort of, but get in the way of a speedy recovery, and I'm sure again we'll hear more from that. Despite that, you'll see in the report and in some of the presentations, we're very firmly fixed on business as usual. It's a big trust running a wide range of services, and we are dealing with a lot of people very, very well indeed. And that business as usual is just so important. And we're also looking to the future. Just because we've had COVID, just because we've had a Christmas exercise to get over it, we're still looking forward to what we can do with this trust, and that's the spirit of the trust. We want to do still better. So with that, I'll pass you over to Jim for Chief Executive's update.
Thanks, Alan. So I'll just cover a bit of that again, really, and just emphasise a few points. As you said, very strong performance overall, as you can see in all of the key factual reports, certainly relative to the rest of the NHS. As has previously been discussed, not quite where we want to be in terms of pre-COVID levels of performance, but the best levels of performance in the NHS on the key metrics. We've had a very, very, very difficult couple of months really, and especially late December and into January, as everybody will be aware, under more pressure and more stretched than we've ever been. And we'll cover that in item 3.2 in a bit more detail with a thorough discussion of winter and what that meant. And Safety and Quality Committee went through it in some detail the other day as well, with a real keenness, understandably, to make sure we learn from it, that we understand whether there were any lines that were crossed, whether there were any incidents that we should be aware of and worried about. So we'll be open about all of that this afternoon. I think in summary, our teams did a fantastic job managing very, very difficult circumstances. But we absolutely couldn't manage to do that in the way that we normally do, given the level of crowding and the complexity and the spike in activity, etc. But I think we should absolutely put that record out staff on the ground and the leadership team for what they did in extremely difficult circumstances. You can see in terms of the dashboard, heading towards green, I really want to see that green and the year on a green. It would be lovely, it would be hard but lovely in terms of getting as close to normal levels of performance as we can. But the organisation is really trying very hard in that respect. And then I think the final thing is just to, again, for any members that are watching or review this later on, an assurance that we're absolutely not shying away from how this looks and feels for patients. You can see a lot of content on the board today about walkabouts and other accounts of how this looks and feels for patients and staff. It's really important to get focused on that and not get too distracted by the kind of headline statistics. So overall, there are signs that we're starting to recover. We're all a bit nervous about saying that, but we recovered well from that Christmas, New Year surge, certainly from an AD, urgent care perspective. We're not out the woods yet. Strong overall levels of performance relative to the rest of the NHS. We're absolutely committed to get back to normal levels of performance.
Okay, thanks Jim. Any comments or questions back to Jim on that? All right, just ask you to keep going and hope for a mild winter going forward. Okay, right, if we move on then to section 2, which is about patient and staff experience. We've got 2 papers coming up next at Enclosure 4 and Enclosure 5, presented by Joe McIntosh. So Joe, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with the patient stories.
Sure.
The 2 stories that we've submitted for this board are, for me, 2 of the best stories, I think, for quite a while in terms of some of the things that they demonstrate. So they come from a ward which is our Mental Health Services for Older People ward, one of the wards in North Tyneside. For me, I think the patient story in particular is really insightful in terms of, well, first of all, they talk about the excellent care, but also the role that the domestic has played in that experience of care. And I think it links back to some of the things that David was talking about yesterday in his presentation to our public governors about the value of our domestic staff and the real role that they play in the patient experience. And I think the patient describes that beautifully in the story. The other things that the patient talks about very much is around the environmental factors and the relationship that they have for a patient in terms of their overall experience and their recovery. And I think they make a valid point, being a fellow vegetarian, that sometimes our menu can seem a little bit monotonous in terms of a vegetarian. So I think that's something as a team that we will have a discussion with our catering services. As I say, I feel that one. Again, they talk about some of the things around the temperature and the lighting and all of those things around sleep and how that's really important for a patient in terms of their recovery and their overall experience, but also some of the steps that the staff have taken to rectify that for them as a patient. If we go on to the member of staff, it's a HCA on that ward. And for me, I think the HCA describes beautifully the whole value of feeling part of a team, feeling the positive aspect of when you have autonomy in your role to make decisions, whatever level you are within your scope, that you have that autonomy to make a difference, to make decisions, but also to feel that your contribution is making a difference to the patients that you care for. I think they also describe the whole holistic understanding and care of a patient beautifully and the difference that makes and the fulfilment that they get from seeing patients from the start to the end of their experience in terms of seeing the recovery for that patient. And you can absolutely identify what that must feel like for a member of staff when they see patients come in crisis and leave the ward at the end having gone through an episode of care and recovered from that. So I thought that was a beautiful story, aligned somewhat with feeling the frustrations of when staffing is pressured, etc. But I think overall a really positive story from a member of the team on that ward and demonstrating all the things that really matter to staff. Has anybody got any questions or comments about the story? I'll move on.
I'll tell you what, on the staff story, I was amazed. That's an ordinary member of staff.
Yeah.
And she's so thoughtful and so inspired by our work. I just thought, there's 12,000 of us and a lot of us think like that.
Yeah.
It's great to read, and that coming from a challenged place, lots of things I guess on a mind, which is they're focused on a job, spiritually as well as physically. Fantastic.
And I think, Chair, it's a demonstration of when all of the things that matter to staff happen for them, the benefit that they feel, we feel as staff. So if we feel valued, we feel part of a team, we feel we've got ability to make changes within our own scope of influence, then all of that helps us to feel more fulfilled and positive about the role that we do. So yeah, I thought it was very timely as well, given we're going through the staff experience survey at the moment.
And if I could say with respect to governors, they often pick up nutrition and food, and it's something we miss from time to time. Vision.
I think in the staff story, the comment about facilitate their well-being rather than doing for them, and I think that's, we're talking a lot about that at the moment, about some of our other wards as well. How do we get more into the feeling of doing for them rather than doing for them, helping them to help themselves. I think that's really nice that she's clearly got that as part of her ethos.
And she just.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Well
you.
done, Jo.
So if we go on to the report for patient and staff experience, I think overall our inpatient performance for both patient perspective and our in-house real-time measurement programme, we continue to have good, consistent, strong performance. If we look at outpatients, excellent again, strong performance across Q3. I think just of note in terms of patient perspective data is the ED. So we've seen the 7th data point for Q3 and all the previous 6 quarters we've fallen below the mean. However, we still sit within the top 20% for the majority of the questions. And we've seen NSEC fall below the mean, but still within that top 20% for Q3. So I think, you know, given what we've talked about in terms of experiences and we know the pressures that ED are facing, I think it's to be expected somewhat, but it's just to keep an eye on it at this point in time. The areas where we feel that are impacted on the score is waiting times and information. So, you know, you can clearly see a relationship between that and that slight drop. Staff experience, so we are just coming to the end of our local staff experience survey. We've got 5 days to go, and I'm pleased to say that we are now at, as of this morning, 4,088, which is, at least over the last year, is the highest response rate we've had to date. And I think if we compare that to if we put it in the context of we've just completed a national staff experience survey where we were asking our staff to complete that. They've come straight back from Christmas after a hard period of time working, and then we're asking them to complete another survey. So I think that's really a positive result in terms of responses. We're doing a lot of initial analysis, and we can see some statistical relevant change in terms of some deterioration in our scores. I'm pleased to say where we saw a deterioration in the July around tools and equipment, and we reacted to that very quickly, and our teams were great in terms of talking to teams, finding out what that was. We have seen a significant improvement. So I think that's really promising, and I think the areas where we're seeing at this stage some deterioration in our scores, I would relate back probably to some of the pressures in the system that we're talking about. But until we see those final scores, that's when we'll start to look at that and look at a plan of action and how we could support our teams.
Okay, Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. Great reports, Jo, thank you. Just on the staff experience, great to see the numbers, particularly off the back of the national survey coming through with such volume. And I guess that's testament that the Trust actually responds to what its people are saying in these surveys, otherwise they wouldn't continue to fill them in, I'm guessing, Jo. So I guess just from an assurance point of view that the Trust is actually listening to what the staff is saying and responding, and I'm guessing the tools and equipment is a perfect example
Demonstration of that. And I think we were mindful of this as well, Bernie, so we made this survey relative shorter than previous surveys, so and part of the cons of that, which was supported by Ross's team, was to say that to teams that we've made this one slightly shorter with the really key core questions. And we also, for this survey, we introduced some questions which were very much about each individual member staff, what's important to me in my home life, who are the people that make me smile, because actually that is talking about holistic care and support for our patients, it's holistic care and support for our staff. So actually understanding the things that matter to staff outside of the home, outside of the workplace, in their home, in their social life, for us as an organisation is just as important. So hopefully staff have valued that opportunity, and we're really looking forward to analysing the responses to find out. We think dogs may feature.
Well, there might be a response to that, Kate. Go on.
Just to build on Joe's point, so we've already started to look at the two questions that are showing a bit of concern, which are friend and relative will be happy with the standard of care provided, and I would recommend my organisation as a place to work. So we're splitting that down into business units, and we're going to look at that really detailed and carry out some focus groups. But I just wanted to highlight that our staff bank are both either equal or above the trust-wide average for both of those, which I think is just incredible in terms of the engagement now that we've got with our staff bank. And I think that's also highlighted in their appraisal completion rates, stat and man training, health and wellbeing conversations, and it's just really good to see those figures on there. Just wanted to highlight that to the board.
Roughly how many people are in the staff bank we're talking about? Several hundreds?
375.
So there's a lot of people actually to carry at that level.
Yeah.
It's really good. Excellent. Steve?
I'm a real fan of using stories to talk about, the impact of what we do. Dashboards are great, but I think stories can also add something. I just wonder whether things like we've heard about today from the staff story in particular, whether there'd be any mileage or any plans to use that in terms of staff recruitment, and putting things on the website and job packs and things like that.
Definitely. So we do an element of it, but Ross and I have got a plan. We want to get a shared post which looks at recruitment and marketing and start to do some of that. And I think, Steve, that works in some areas and not in others. So it's about us being quite agile with so if it was digital, for example, would that work? If it was nursing, would it work better? So just being quite agile and looking at those. But yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah.
So one of the things I think Kate or Joe touched on was the level of care offered and the opinion of families and friends, and that's important. And I think it's been particularly important over the Christmas period, where people obviously run off their feet with 50% over their normal workload to deal with. So care would suffer. I don't think safety or harm were a problem, but actually just the care and the sort of moments with the patient. I think they probably slipped, and we're as keen to know about that and as keen to correct that going forward. But I think it needs to be understood that as we went through that, it was a very, very difficult period to get through. But we got through, I guess, not quite perfectly in that respect. So we need to keep the families and friends stuff going, Joe.
I also wonder as well, Chair, our teams, all of our teams, we know they deliver excellent care and they have really high standards. So I just wonder when, people in the NHS, we're big reflectors by the nature of who we are, and I just wonder whether it's that they're feeling they're not meeting their standards for them, and actually the care that our patients are feeling is still of a good quality. But you try to put yourself in their shoes and think how would I be reflecting, and that might be an explanation for some of the response.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's not the staff's fault. I mean,
Absolutely,
working on a huge
it's
question.
just how they feel.
It just needs to be understood, I think. Good. Anything else for Joe? Very good. Okay, so we'll move on to walkabout. So the boards don't just sit in boardrooms, so we're quite keen that members, executive and non-execs, get around. We've got two walkabouts to report from non-executive directors. First one from Phil Lobb and then Bernie McCarthy. Phil?
Thanks, Chair. So this was a walkabout of palliative care at North Tyneside, Ward 5. Just before I get on to that part of it, I did spend a little bit of time at the entrance to the hospital, which I always try to do on my walkabout, and the welcome there from not just the volunteers, but we supplement the volunteers there with a couple of bank staff. It's a fantastic service. I mean, I just sat and watched them most of the time, but they were organising the patient transport service. The bank staff can also take patients around in wheelchairs and so forth, so it supplements some of the porters as well. But it was great to see that in action. I don't know whether it's something we might want to think a little bit more about across other sites as well, because it does make a big difference to the patients when they've got those people there. The only other thing that they mentioned to me was about an issue on access. It's outpatient gynae, where you have to go through the main hospital, outside, up or down some stairs and so forth, and it's obviously quite difficult, particularly for the elderly patients. We didn't design it like that. I think it was a consequence of some of the other developments we've done at North Tyneside, so we're looking, I think, at potential solutions for that.
I think there is a separate entrance for gynae, so you can either, if you go through the hospital, you have to go back out and in again. But there is there's a separate gynae outpatients entrance from desk,
Right.
etc.
Okay.
So there might be something about making that a lot more visible.
Yes, and I think probably also telling the sort of staff at the front that that's maybe the better option as well.
I heard them describe it the other day, Phil, and I think probably what they do is to get there internally, it's quite complicated. It's
Yes,
almost
it is.
impossible to describe. It is probably just quicker to do it externally, but it's a good point, especially when the weather's bad.
Yeah,
And also signage on documentation that people are invited in to point to that end of the
I think,
as well.
yes. Yeah, I think that would be good, yeah. Excellent. In terms of the palliative care ward itself, so Jeremy accompanied me around there, so thanks for the time on that. And I would describe it overall as quite a humbling experience. It's the first time I've really been into a palliative care ward. I have to say that the nurses and the rest of the staff there provide fantastic, compassionate care. It really is amazing to see in action. And as I mentioned, we just happened to be there when a relative had popped back to give a donation to the ward as well. So it was great to see the valuable service that's perceived there by not just the patients but also their relatives. The move to Ward 5 had occurred a couple of years ago, and they were talked quite a lot about the improvements that had offered in terms of the services to the patients, so that was a great thing to see. They did raise an issue about, and it's a bit of a specific point, but it's about NIAS assistance, where patients do want to return home for their final days and so forth, so we will take that up with them when the medical director's in place. That's it. There we are. And finally, we also took a trip around the Milton Community Support Team, and again, I think they do a great job, particularly on rapid discharge, which often obviously is required under the circumstances. They only ask us, could they have a car? So I've raised this with Fleet, and I think we're going to look into see whether we can find some kind of dedicated vehicles, because at the moment the dependency is on the staff vehicles, which can work fine some of the time, but obviously can be difficult as well. So we'll have a look at that. But overall, as I say, just fantastic, compassionate care, and it really came through talking to all the people we met on the visit.
Yeah, really good. The upstairs thing is an anxiety, isn't it? It really is getting the sick folk upstairs. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Bijou and I did a walkabout at North Tyneside Urgent Treatment Centre and Ward 12. It was on the 19th of December, so we were right in the thick of that increasing demand indeed. If not record levels, I think it was near record levels. I think the Urgent Treatment Centre was 207 attendees on that day, and it was quite obvious when we went there that it was pretty rammed. That said, on most of these walkabouts you get the chance to speak to not just the nurse or the nurse in charge or the sister, but you get to talk some stuff. there wasn't any staff to talk to, they were all attending to patients, and rightly so. But that said, it was kind of Maria, the nurse in charge on urgent treatment centre, she was completely engaging and wanted to spend time with us despite how busy it was, and she was particularly proud and wanted to tell us about the quality improvement, the QI work she was doing, and the engagement with the team. And we went into the staff room and we looked at the whiteboards and we looked at the great work she was doing, and it was really great to see that at the ground level, because we hear an awful lot about it strategically through this type of meeting, but to see it and feel it at the ground level and the difference it was making was great. So that was great to see. The Ward 12 again was just chock-a-block. I think it was pretty much in capacity. But again, we spoke to the nurse in charge, who interestingly I had spoken to about 18 months previously with Bijou, as it so happened, and he readily recalled that, not least the Dynamap that we managed to respond to. I'm saying we, Bijou responded to rapidly and made sure that was in place. So that was remembered and appreciated. And the last visit we had there was prior to the ward refurbishment. So it was good for me to see the difference before and after, and to hear from people on the ward the difference it's made. So that was quite remarkable and very much appreciated. We talked about some of the pressures, inevitably, you know, any vacancy or any spike in absences causing, with such demand, causes these folks a bit of pressure. But it was kind of not in the negative. It was all, you know, what could we do better? They were struggling with, it was actually just about 3 vacancies, but for them it felt a lot. But it wasn't like, oh, woe is us, we cannot recruit people. It was, look at what can we do different. And what had been particularly frustrating for Ward 12 was they had getting people to the point of interview and people were dropping out. So the whole focus was, can we do something different or better to where these folks end up going to, such that we, but that's been picked up immediately. You know, Bijou and Kate were on that the very next day. You know, that ward's keen to try and pilot things, and Kate's receptive to that. So it was great to see, again, when there's intelligence and feedback coming from the front line, it's picked up and it's been acted upon, and that's really what it's about. So in summary, the hospital was extremely busy. Like Phil, I spent about 20 minutes with the meet and greet. You cannot underestimate how powerful that service is. What was interesting on the meet and greet was the pushback they were getting from the public. I don't know if you saw this, Phil, but people not washing their hands. Yeah. And actually, not just not washing their hands, but pushing back to the meet and greeters that, oh, I don't want to wash my hands. Well, they weren't getting past. These folks, with a smile, in a very, you talk about it kind of an iron fist and a velvet glove, these people weren't getting past. But it was done in such a fun and engaging way, people just went and washed their hands. Yeah. You know, but it was interesting culturally, the difference in the public's attitude, but those stuff are worth their weight in gold. You know, the great visit. Staff under immense pressure. We saw front end that then when the pressures are growing, doing a great job and holding up remarkably well in the circumstances.
Actually, the first thing they asked me is, have you washed your hands? Which of course I have. Point out.
See them watching as you go in. Good. Any other comments on those 2 walkabouts? I mean, you said you had the peak time during the list. Good. Well, thank you for that, and they continue as we speak these walkabouts, so it's finished. And we're still, interestingly, infection control do allow us on the wards, which is much better than it was a year ago. So a heads up, we're getting there. Right, next we've got, Chris is not here yet. John is not here yet. So next we've got winter update.
Simon Eden's turn up.
Yes, not there yet.
That's just outside.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Johnny's doing.
So you're written about 10 minutes ahead. Very
Which is
unusual.
unusual, I was just going to say, I just looked at the clock.
It's John, is it?
Johnny Fairley
Yeah, I know.
is the best and come first, but we'll just remember that it's John behind there.
So I'm not sure if John's going to mention it, but certainly in the run-up to Christmas, remember we had the Strep A scare going right around the country with some unfortunate child deaths. And we were overrun with paediatrics, I guess, for the month after Christmas.
Very busy.
They were managed to,
Do you want to do the education report?
Jeremy?
Do you want to do the education report? We haven't, what have we got? Are they all right?
Do 4 points. Is Andrea not?
She's not there, it's me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I do apologise.
Close
I have some instructions.
Right, so we're going to 4.1 until we get ourselves organised.
We are. So this is the annual education self-assessment report. It comes every year, and for those who've read the actual report, you'll see that it comes in a format that means we have to complete it according to the GMC standards. So the content is very much determined by the GMC and by ENIC. But really, as the executive summary says, and certainly the message Andrea wanted to convey is that this is we're in a very good place. There are always things that we can and should improve as a result of our detailed feedback, and you can follow those particular items with references all the way back through into the report. But we do continue when we get visits to get good feedback from the people who, on our behalf, talk to the doctors in training and the medical students. And we have a very committed and very well organised educational workforce that is expanding and is covering more and more ground. So this is a good news story and something that I think we very much benefit from. Andrea Mars is in as Director of Education. She's been in post I think about 3 years now, doing a grand job. So particularly we've implemented a new app for the junior doctors in training. It hasn't completely managed to get them to attend the Junior Doctor Forum, as I think you'll have heard, but they are able to communicate and get a number of problems and get supported with that. But it's items 2 and 3 which I think is about widening our education offer, particularly with our community promise that our medical education and our whole education team are deeply involved in. And if you examine the structure that's put in the SAR, you can see that this isn't about medical education, it's about education as a whole. And in particular, looking at the development of our population and the people who live there to try and come and work for us. We're a major employer within the region, and our continued success will be around developing our population. In terms of educational governance, we're working hard to exist in that blended workforce arena, and I'm very much looking to look forward to the build that's going over at NSETch. I think there is further opportunities to establish the links between the medical professionals and the allied health professionals and nursing in terms of education. She has highlighted 3 areas for improvement, which is something that we must do as part of the report. One is around increasing supervision capacity. We've always been ahead of the game in allocating time to our clinical educational supervisors, but it's just really about increasing that workforce, particularly in some of the proliferation of new novel roles in with nurses and ACPs, making sure that they get the supervision that they need. There are some recruitment challenges, particularly around junior medical staff and teaching research fellows, some of the people that are being attracted into the private market, so we'll try and make the best use of those roles and try and attract more people in there. And then there's something which I hope will be resolved once we have opened the facility around how we deal with our education facilities. Happy to take any easy questions because there's a lot of detail. It goes all the way back down to it.
Any difficult questions for Jeremy then? Richard?
So just one comment from me, because I think it's a good read and it resonates really well with the feedback I've been getting from Newcastle University about the experience of medical students here, and certainly they're full of praise for the trust and the work they do, not only with the hard clinical skills but also encouraging them to be part of the community.
Thanks very much.
It's really good. I guess, I mean, in terms of numbers, in the national conversation that goes on about recruitment and development of doctors and professionals, I mean, are we seeing that move going forward? Are we seeing the more greater numbers going into the system?
So we definitely are. I mean, particularly we notice it because we've now got students from Sunderland University. So there's a whole capacity expansion that's associated with that is a bit of a challenge, and I think Paul is definitely seeing it. It is part of the picture around the workforce changes that we've got between, because a lot of the new posts aren't centrally funded. They are, they rely on trusts, and we are I think probably the first to put our hands up to make sure that we're continuing to train people where we can.
Because I think, we've got several hundred junior doctors across the Northeast, which we have in this, and then we've got this sort of super nurse practitioners and things that you referred to, the other professions. Let's get a handle on that to see how many numbers, how they're growing, locally supported and nationally supported. So get a sense of what we're doing, because without these, the future is limited, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure Kate will be able to fill us in on some of the detail, but I'm absolutely certain. I mean, as we've moved into the new role programme, there is a certain amount of double working, and I do think we are now at the point where we can start to. And it is important when you establish new roles that they work alongside doctors, but you need to get the balance right, because otherwise, if there's too many doctors around, they take over. We'll be looking at it. Okay. Lots of people around.
I mean, there's lots of good stuff in the report, quite right, and the universities are nicely complementary to us. Right? We need to keep that going ever more strongly. It's good stuff. Do we get feedback from HEE on their service?
Yes, we do. Yes, no, they come and. I mean, we get feedback at the visits. They reports, and it's very nice indeed. They very much like the Health and Wellbeing Centre. That's been such a positive thing for both the training staff, but also it's a great place to host visiting organisations.
I mean, the Health and Wellbeing Centre, segue, but I mean, they're amazing for us all, aren't they? It's a social place where people can go and work, socialise. Not just doctors, take a bit of respite, everyone. A few too many pillars, my goodness. And we're not finished yet. We've got others, North Tyneside, Orangeburg and Blackpool, yes. Good. Right, so let's go to the levels. We've got Kirsty. So you were there, we were so we move back to 2.4, which is freedom to speak up. So we've got Kirsty Dixon.
Good morning, everybody. So for new faces that don't know who I am, I'm a green guardian. I'm Kirsty, the Freedom to Speak Up guardian for Northumbria. It's become a little uniform with green branding. But yeah, so it's been 6 years now that I've been post, and often I thought I was going to be out of a job in 5 years. So it's about kind of reflecting on what I've achieved over the 5 years, where we've got to as an organisation and where next. So the last, I'd say the last year, we've had some, probably the best moments of my role at Northumbria. We've had the most learning, we've had the most challenges, the most complex cases that have come through Freedom to Speak Up. You can see from the numbers that they are consistent, that the staff are using the Freedom to Speak Up route. So it's about, I've looked at some of the rationale behind what the reason is for that, working with the internal processes to look at if there's gaps there, or am I just becoming the cultural norm that the staff know who I am and it's easy to come to me. So it's about looking at all the aspects of the role. You can see the anonymous numbers have started to increase slightly over quarter 2 and 3. So I've done a bit of gap analysis myself, looking at some of the rationale behind that, and working with other organisations regionally, because some organisations have promoted anonymous contact where I've not taken that approach. So it's about working with the trust now to say, should we be actively encouraging more anonymous, should we not, what does that look like? There's platforms that can capture that. I would say the anonymous ones that we have had have been genuine cases that have had excellent outcomes. They've been managed well, they've been handled appropriately, and they've had the feedback back to them as best as possible, back to the areas of the teams. It's not always good to get, when they're anonymous, that means that I don't know who they are. So that's the true sense of anonymous. So I think it's just being mindful around, is that number creeping up and why is that? Looking at the kind of nature of concerns, that it's not, it seems quite consistent with all the peaks and troughs of, the bullying, the behaviours, and the detriment follows a similar pattern to that. It's again 106 people that have come to me in 2 quarters. It's not a lot of numbers, but for me, one person's is equally valuable. So it's good to know that those 106 people have somewhere an alternative route, that they are being heard. I would say that from the pattern that we've had in the last 5 years, we've predominantly had nurses speaking up, that they seem to be really good at raising concerns, using the DTEC system, and I think it's now looking at the areas that it's now coming into, that medical dental is increasing, public health is increasing, social care. So the numbers that are reflecting in Freedom to Speak Up as other and unknown, people are just generally starting to know what Freedom to Speak Up is and the differences that it offers. One of the concerns that I had myself was the drop from quarter 2 last year to this quarter 2 was a 50% to 10% in staff raising concerns with managers before coming to myself. And I know that Kate and I have had conversations to just explore that. So we've got kind of work going on in workforce and boards and different areas that we're exploring some of the reasons for that. So I think it's again quarter 2 to 3 it is on the increase again, so it's hopefully on the right trajectory there. But keep working together, we'll get that. The concerns open and closed, I've decided with the help and support from other directors in the room that we're going to add a column to that, because it's quite meaningless data as it's presented. It just shows kind of my flow of work and the pace that I work at, and it shows concerns that I'm closing at the end of quarter. So we're taking that to the next stage really, and just looking at how we can make that a bit more meaningful data. So some support from the staff and patient experience team for that, thanks. The data speaks for itself there, where you can see in quarter 2 we had a high number of cases that were coming to myself that were reported to raise DTECs before coming to myself. So again, when I did exploring with the DTECs and patient services team, that was mainly around the volume of cases that generally the staff were dealing with, and the feedback, the delay in the feedback to staff. So looking at improvements there. It's to me it's been a successful year and challenging, but I think it shows the resilience from everybody in the room, everybody that's been working you know, at full pace. The staff that have been experiencing you know, burnout and things like that we've seen. I think it feels to me like we're kind of in the right direction. And I like to think that we've kind of mastered the speaking up element, but it's the listen up and the follow up next. So one of the non-exec directors asked me for my infographic. That's all very well, but turn your page over, what you do next with your blank page. So that's where we're at. I'm happy to take any questions. Anybody's.
Very good, Kirsty, thank you. Any comments or questions back to Kirsty?
Right, one thing. Don't you mind?
Thanks, Kirsty. It's a good report as ever. I just wanted to flag, because you mentioned that you participated in the well-led review in there, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was around improving the join-up between the data we get. So we really value the insight from the cases that people bring to you, joining that data up with especially RES and DES and some of the data that we have. And I thought that really chimed with the theme of the data work that we're doing at the moment around joining up things that haven't previously been joined up, and that's going back to IMT on the 6th of February. So I just wanted to make sure that this join up, as one of a few different join ups like this that we're talking about, found its way somewhere into our roadmap for the data work that we're doing, because I think there's more insight that we can get out of that when we join it up.
Thanks, Andrew. It's about Kate, do you want to come
No,
in
no,
on this? So yeah, there's been quite a lot of new strategic groups that have been formed in the last year, and I've been part of those. So we're looking at the staff survey review, so Freedom to Speak Up will feed into that stream. We've got the pod, the dashboard, so we're looking at workforce and how the Freedom to Speak Up feeds into that data as well, to triangulate at that level. It's also, for myself, I still continue to do the training for, you know, all the inductions, care certificate, the preceptorship, apprenticeships. So it's kind of ground level and strategic level, so it's, I would say it feels more joined up, that we're getting that in place.
Great.
Thanks, Kirsty. I just wanted to comment on two things really. You mentioned around talking to line managers first, which is absolutely key, and I think there's definitely some more work we probably need to do in that, and really digging deep into which areas they can and they can't do that, and then what are the reasons behind that. So I think that's probably something we should look at together that form part of the work you're doing with staff experience. Some of the qualitative comments are quite concerning, and I wouldn't want any of our staff to feel any of that. So again, I think there's probably something for us to do with where are they coming from in terms of an area, so that we can have a look, pick it up and talk to them. I wouldn't just want to leave that alone, because some of those comments are not great.
Yeah. Ruth?
I think similarly to what Kate said, the thing about concerns raised and closed is about being clear that we know what happens when they're closed, and they're closed with some kind of satisfactory outcome, because I again read those comments and thought I don't want that continuing. So I think if we could see some data about that end point would probably help us understand that we are, you know, these things do happen, but we are addressing them, because I would hate those to sit around.
Kind of a question, who signs off closed, isn't it? So that make sure that it truly is closed.
I don't think I'm questioning Kirsty closing them. I think I'm just understanding where, because it's Kirsty's. I think it is for these purposes, isn't it?
For the purpose of the report, it's now been suggested to us, advised by the National Office, that the individuals are responsible for closing the case. So it's very challenging sometimes to, you know, to have those conversations with staff to say, we've got the feedback, you might not like it, but that's where we're at. We've got the feedback, you've had a good outcome. Often these comments that are coming through are staff that may be leaving the organisation and they haven't accessed other routes before coming to me, so it's mindful of keeping the role in context also, and if that can be demonstrated through the report better, I'm happy to have that support.
I think the qualitative comments were really quite helpful in that bit, but you can see our staff feel some of them are quite uncomfortable. Good, I'll keep the good work going. Doesn't look like quite overall, it's certainly good this.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for your help.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. Right. Is Johnny inside?
I believe so, yes.
Morning, Johnny. Have a seat. Sure, good. Johnny Caldwell and Beth Robert. Welcome.
Thanks.
Shout
Thanks. So thanks very much for inviting us to give an update today about child care. Doing the slides as well. The first slide was just a description of the different services that we have in the Child Health Business Unit. There's quite a few different services across Northumberland and North Tyneside, a little bit into Newcastle as well. So I counted 13 different services there in quite a small business unit. So we provide acute paediatrics up at Cramlington at NSEC with the Paediatric Emergency Department co-located with the short stay paediatric assessment unit there and provide the special care baby unit at NSEC. We have the comprehensive community paediatric service across Northumberland and North Tyneside. In community paediatrics, you do a lot of developmental assessments on children with developmental problems and looking after children who've got complex physical disability as they get older and complex illness. And we provide those services out of settings in Berwick, Alnwick, Hexham, Blythe, Wansbeck, in Northumberland and down in North Tyneside at North Tyneside General University Centre there. And we have some mental health services that we provide. We have the Tier 3 service in North Tyneside, which has some psychiatrists, psychologists and children's psychiatric nurses and other mental health, children's mental health professionals. We have the primary mental health worker service in Northumberland, which is a Tier 1, Tier 2 level service. And a collection of other services too, specialist nurses in diabetes, asthma, epilepsy, allergy, and community children's nursing. And then in big services, the immunisation team, which is school-based immunisations in Northumberland, North Tyneside and Newcastle, which moves to this year. So overall, there's 223 staff in child health, a budget of 18.7. So I'm just going to talk about the last year, and I thought I'd probably put it into context with coronavirus, because that has been important for us. Are you fortunate that children didn't become unwell, particularly with acute illness with coronavirus? We did have some children who were good, but not many. And we had some children who have longer term symptoms of long COVID. It's a relatively small number. But it had a significant impact, I think, on children in terms of the repeated lockdowns and the attendance at school and early nursery provision for children. Definitely had an impact, I think, on aspects of children's development and educational attainment. And the group of children who were perhaps more disadvantaged financially and deprivation were probably disproportionately affected. And that's had an impact, I think, in terms of the relationships, the development, some of their emotional health and well-being, and we've seen that coming through in the work team. It's also shifted the usual pattern of illness and infection that children suffer from, so it was really effective at reducing the transmission of coronavirus, and probably better at reducing flu and RSV, which causes bronchiolitis. So we've seen peaks of that this year that we haven't seen for a couple of years. And everyone probably heard about invasive strep A infection. So nationally there was a cluster of invasive strep A out of the usual time frame that you get it. It's usually springtime, and it happened in winter. And there were worries that that was going to be much more significant than it was, caused lots of worries and anxiety in parents, understandably. So there's a big peak in activity related to that as well. But fortunately, we've not had significant strep A infection in our group of children. So I think within that context, it has been a busy year. Up at NSEC, certainly in December time, we had activity levels of over 100 kids a day presenting there, where normally we might get 50, 60 children a day. We have some days of 120, 130, and even Christmas Day had about 75 children, which is unheard of. Usually everyone enjoying Christmas. So that was really busy, and the staff did really well, I think. Very supportive in the way, very flexible, doing additional shifts. We were able to double cover some of our rotas in terms of nurse practitioners and medical staff, and sometimes but it was extremely busy, and if you went onto the unit, you see children right up to the door on additional seating, waiting to be seen. Really well. And the team, over the course of the year, have been introducing some of the digital work which has been going on. The trust are working with the digital team around clinical notes, and that should hopefully be in place in the next couple of months on the acute unit there, as well as the other digital developments which have been going on with schemes, which is great. We secured some funding from the Northern Neonatal Network around developing a multidisciplinary team in Skaboo. And we've got some funding for physio and health psychology put there, which will be put in place. Transitional care work around that still ongoing with maternity, around developing services so that children who need babies that need a little bit of additional care, perhaps help with feeding, treatment for jaundice or treatment for infection, can stay with the mums on the maternity service rather than being admitted to Skaboo, and that's still work which is again, just going back a little bit to coronavirus, and I think the impact it's had on children's emotional health. We've had a consistent increase in referrals to both of the mental health services that we run in North Tyneside, Tier 3 service, and Northumberland, the PHW service. We had very long waits, you'll probably be aware of, in North Tyneside to complete assessments for autism and ADHD, the sort of new developmental assessments as it's described. And over the last year or two, we've been working with Helios and another provider, working with the team, and the rates have come down significantly for that. So a huge improvement there. It's given a bit of headspace, I think, to work around the clinical model and the recruitment into that. And similarly with PMHWs in Northumberland, they've had quite a bit of staff turnover, an increase in staffing, and we've had to work with that team, with the commissioners. And the provider they go to for onward referrals, CTMW, and we have to work with them as well in terms of pathways. But it's still work in progress, but we've been a significant improvement there in terms of managing the increased referrals. School-based immunisation team, so that's been busy over the year. We've had delays to the normal immunisation programme. Some of that has been related to coronavirus and doing the coronavirus vaccines. Some of it has been related to some delays in the provision of all of the flu vaccines that we needed. It's taken a little bit longer, so we've had to have changes in that programme over the year. But they've introduced the electronic consent form, which has been really helpful in improving consent rates and reducing admin time and improving some efficiency in the team. So we can focus on some of the schools where the consent rates for immunisations have been traditionally quite low. We've been able to do some focus work on that. Children in care is the used to be looked after children, the LAC service. So children who go into care need a health assessment in 28 days, and they have further health assessments every 6 months or 12 months. There's been an increase in the number of children in care over the last year. Some of those children have got quite complex health backgrounds, and we've got a small number, not many, but a small number of children who are classed as unaccompanied asylum seekers, and they have additional requirements in terms of their initial health assessment and looking at unmet health need and sometimes language issues around that. So that's additional work for that team, but again, the flexibility in the team, we managed to keep largely within the standards in terms of assessment 2020. When we went into COVID and lockdown, we always kept face-to-face consultations right throughout the very first lockdown, but we moved a lot more for follow-up appointments, in particular to virtual appointments, video consultations, telephone appointments. There's been a shift back definitely to face-to-face consultation, because I think we all value that more in children, because you want to see a child and you want to assess them. But there's definitely still a mix of consultations around face-to-face and virtual appointments, and that will continue. Carry on. Also, this is some of the feedback for the ward. I don't know if you can see it in detail. We had some feedback a couple of years now, I think, from CQC, the last review that the last survey that was done, and there were a couple of areas that were we didn't do as well on in that we wanted to do. There's been work again around improving the access to hot drinks and meals for parents on the ward, improvements in Wi-Fi, which was another issue. But there is some more harder to measure, but more quality improvement work around involving young people and families in consultations and around providing information about illness and medication. And the team, I think, have done really well with that. And our usual feedback that we get on the board, we get some really good positive results for that. So that's really great. These are just a couple of slides that show the increase in attendance. That's the weekly ED attendance. You can see, it doesn't look a big peak there when you see all the kids waiting on the unit, but that was that sort of paler blue line over December just shows the increase in activity on the unit, certainly Saturday weekend now. So, the words about strep A seem to have passed a little bit, which is good. And the RSD, bronchiolitis and flu have also updated. And these are, again, probably a little bit hard to look at, but to read, but it's about the definitely reduction in referrals to outpatient appointments during coronavirus and the repeated lockdowns, and we've seen it bounce back. I think some of those is catch-up on referrals that weren't made and that we've made. But we've seen an increase in referrals in children with concerns about the development of social communication, possibly autism, and those increased referrals can continue in it. So we had quite a lot of pressure on the waiting times for paediatrics, both general paediatrics and community paediatrics over summertime, and the team done a lot of work at doing some additional clinics, increasing the capacity within the outpatient service, and we're right back down now to where we were pre-COVID in terms of outpatient wait, which is great. We wanted to see. Just about the development of the team, the people in the team over the last year or so. There's been a nursing review on special care and on the acute unit, with some increased nurse staffing for both of those. We have our special care baby unit in a lot of the sort of traditional care that we're provided by medical staff is provided by advanced neonatal nurse practitioners, and we've got a rolling programme to continue to train and recruit nurse practitioners. We've got 2 new trainees and posts, and we also developed a lead role in the business unit for nurse practitioners, specialist nurses on both the acute unit and the neonatal unit. Again, looking at the career development and progression and retention of that group, it's been really successful on the acute paediatric unit, so we've developed a close crossover for that. We have been successful actually with recruitment for consultants. We recruited into CAMS, community peds, and into the acute paediatric unit, and so we're up to establishment, actually one above our original establishment in the acute unit now for consultants. That's excellent, really. Not reliant on agency staff all over. New manager role in Skiboo and on the acute unit in Cramlington, and new management structure in CAMS as well. And the nurse education course for child health for the last 12 months. So this is just a couple of slides about staff experience. So the Trust, I think, does really well in terms of staff experience nationally. Child health is definitely does well within the organisation as well, but it has been a challenging time, no doubt, and it continues to be. similarly with the other measures from July 2022 show quite positive results within child health. I think recognising still is a difficult part of the staff. So over the year, well, child health, yes, it's a small business unit with lots of different staff working across community settings, acute settings, mental health services across the whole of Northumberland, North Tyneside, into Newcastle. It's been definitely a busy year with some unexpected peaks in activity, and I think the team have worked really well with the managing and the support that we have, and with others within the organisation very supportive of the service, and I think they're doing a good job in time which have been difficult.
Good. So any comments back to Alistair?
Report, Johnny, and I think it reflects the feel from the service. I was just wondering, sorry, I don't know, Mike, but I was just wondering, we know that post-COVID there was a significant increase in, I think, emerging safeguarding concerns, particularly when children went back to school, and there was definitely an upsurge in that. It's not mentioned in the pressures that summary there. Just wondered how much of that, because clearly it's a safeguarding team, but there's a linkage with obviously child health directly as well as the interface with health visiting. I just wondered, had that in itself created significant pressures for the team?
It was interesting, during the initial lockdown we were expecting there to be an increased number of child protection referrals and child protection concerns, and that didn't happen. But as that lockdown finished, I think concerns which were probably being masked or weren't being identified became apparent, and that's why there was an increase in children in care, and so there was an increased number of children who went into the care system after this lockdown. So that's the impact that we saw. But I think the actual sort of referrals and assessments that we do for child protection cases, we didn't see that, but the wider concerns around neglect and around the wider parenting issue became apparent after that.
Alan?
Yeah. How are you doing with the relationship with Great North Children's Hospital for those children who need to be transferred there after 23 and a half hours?
It remains a challenge, Alan, definitely. So the relationships are good, without a doubt, with the clinical teams there. But in terms of bed capacity for some of those children, it does remain a challenge in getting some of those children across. But when children need to go across, we can get them across. It's that bit about continuing to provide the care for them locally, so we've got the capacity in the unit to continue to see all the children that are coming in, and that's the challenge that we have sometimes. There was a worry, I think, about paediatric intensive care provision in Newcastle over winter and what impact that may have, but that didn't materialise to a large extent, and there's work going on in the organisational delivery network for critical care for children in the region about increasing the capacity of landing beds down in James Cook to increase the capacity generally. But the teams have conversations with the Newcastle clinicians about children that they need to get across, and the ones that they definitely need to get across, and we get support while they're waiting to get children across.
Can I just ask Jeremy, Jeremy knows what I'm going to ask him probably, on the occasions where some children do need really intensive care, are we satisfied that we're geared up to be able to provide that until the rescue teams come?
Yes. So, we're all APLS trained, we've got all of the right kit, we have the right people in the room. It's done on a treatment transfer basis. Sometimes that stretches into time zones that we don't like,
yes. So I definitely the paediatric team feel they get a huge amount of support from critical care, and I think we get support from the intensive care team in Newcastle and the transfer team, the medical transfer team in Newcastle around some of the clinical management. But yeah, I think Jeremy said waiting for an extra ambulance when it's out down in Stockton collecting a baby or crossing Whitehaven and waiting for an ambulance to come across with the team, you do have to provide care.
I mean, I think, as I've said before, I think we do get tremendous support from colleagues in Newcastle, and you know, they're always really helpful. But like everyone in the system, there aren't always the facilities you need immediately when you require them. And I don't think that we've really got into too much difficulty in that period where we're having to do what is necessary.
Steve, and then I think Bernie, you've got your hand up.
Thanks for the presentation, it was really interesting. I've got a particular interest in the access to CAMS, but this point might be more broadly placed across the business unit. I wonder whether you feel there's enough space to consider innovation, and what, you know, if there are things that could be done differently. And the follow-up question is there a standing invite to the Health Inequalities Programme Board, which meets within the Trust?
So in terms of the first point, definitely the team, so the CAMS team down in North Tyneside and the Tier 1, Tier 2 service up in Northumberland have been under lots of pressure. I think over this year with that involvement of Elios and taking out some of the pressure around those diagnostic assessments for autism and ADHD has given the team quite a bit of headspace to think about the pathways and the pathway development. And there's been more, again, I think more sort of team meetings and the way teams thinking about some of the different pathways and thinking about how to do things differently. We've had some help looking at the workforce strategy, thinking about what the national strategy is for child health and what some of the difficulties are for that. We've had some help within the team from colleagues external to the organisation to look at that. So I think they're doing that work, and I think you're right about pathways and about assessments and doing things differently. I think probably lots to learn from the place, but I think we're open to that. I left the second question. I'm not quite sure if we're getting a regular invite to the Health and Equality. We'll certainly have some contact with people within that board. Off the top of my head, if we're having attendance to that.
I think it would be useful just to create some of that space for thinking and doing some research and data about what could be done differently and what might help.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's generally been answered. Thanks for the presentation, Johnny. It's very informative. It was about the mental health increase in demand. And children's are quite a broad church of people, and I was wondering if there was a specific age type of category that's been more affected, and actually about did you have a view on the system's capacity to meet that increased demand?
It's definitely around the so it's the neurodevelopmental pathway, which is really children who where there are concerns around autism and around conditions like ADHD, and autism has broadened hugely in how you would diagnose autism now. So it's now probably about 1 in 70, 1 in 80 children can be diagnosed with autism, and lots of adults now diagnosed later in life with autism. So and that's definitely increasing the number of children who are coming through for assessment. One of the difficulties which I think we have is that still, I think some families and some educational settings think that you need a diagnosis before you can secure additional support. Irrespective of that diagnosis, you get the support, and that's the, we still have that challenge. I think all the time I've been doing paediatrics, and it's still there in the background, and so we get children referred into the service who may not be quite ready to be referred in, or parents not that keen at that point in seeking a diagnosis, and certainly a teenage child might not be interested in whether they've got a diagnosis of autism or not, but they're pushed into a system, medical system, which sometimes isn't always the best thing for them in the support.
You're a professional, okay?
Thanks. Just a reflection, so we've got 12,000 staff, so our staff will be affected by some of these issues that are going on with their own children, naturally. And that will cause issues around absence and how our staff are feeling at work, especially post-COVID. And from a HR perspective, we've seen a lot more of that within our conversations. I'm not sure it's a question for you, John, it's more a reflection on how do we support our staff who, this is obviously increased, so it's always been there, but it's increasing, to be at work and feel well at work while this is happening with their children. And I guess it's some health and wellbeing support offer we could potentially look at, but it will be an issue with our staff.
I suppose it contributes overall, doesn't it, to how people are feeling just generally with everything else that's going on. This is another factor within this. I think worrying about your kid, what you do, you continue to do that. Well, and that, I think it's all part of it, but definitely I think the impact of coronavirus and lockdown on children, we didn't focus on children during it. It became apparent not being accessing education and not, having long-peer relationships were really, really important for them. I don't think we realised that to go out.
Good. Well, you might say to a small business unit, actually it's more interested to understand this morning than anything else. I think, to your credit, you've actually got the businesses, the services in good places.
Yeah.
But I think you've left us with mental health. There's quite a worry about cost of living. There's quite a worry about neglect.
Yeah.
And right up front. So, small business unit, a lot to do. I think you're doing it. And I love the demeanour with which you presented it. And actually, Beth nodding beside me. But it's good. Keep up the good work. I'm sure it's really hard in some places.
Yeah. Enjoy.
Enjoy it. Okay. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Is it Bijou next week?
Simon is just coming in now.
Right. Right, so we're up to winter updates, so this extends through into January. It's still winter. You on?
Am I on? So, thank you everybody. Yeah, so I'm here to kind of give a bit of a winter update on behalf of Medicine, but actually the organisation, but I guess it extends, we've got particular focus on a very tight period over the kind of just before Christmas to just after New Year period. So, so in summary, it's been one of the toughest winters we've ever seen, and it probably feels like every winter someone says that, but this is a different level to that. So we saw unprecedented pressures, which I'll just share a little bit more detail on in a second. And I think I need to be clear that we've also mitigated that with unprecedented responses and escalations for beds across the organisation. That staff and teams have been fantastic to manage that all the way through. And we've been very proactively looking for any incidents or issues attributable to the pressures. It's very clear as what we've heard and what we've looked into that there's certainly examples where care wasn't to the standard that we'd expect, which is understandable given the pressures we were in, just simply delays and other issues. But we've not found any examples of significant incidents to date attributable to the pressures. So people who are familiar with this anyway from the media and other sort of things, but there was just a perfect storm really, that the usual winter pressures were disturbed by an overlap really of the a slightly late presentation of the children's viruses, higher than expected amount of flu early in December, a bit of COVID, although not a major thing to it. Obviously, the strep A concerns at least, strikes, and this growing number of people in the system all had a bit of an impact. We also had the cold spell early in December, which increased trauma, so there was a big pressure from that as well. So there was just this perfect storm of all these sorts of things, which put on a huge amount of pressure. And This is a slide just looking at flu in particular. So we're the blue slide that seems to go really, really high, and that's just, we were over affected by flu in the northeast compared to the rest of the country, which was all affected by flu, so we just had a really predominance of this. And this resulted in really, right across the region, really high levels of bed occupancy, high number of attends, but our performance remained strong, and we remained over 80%. It was nowhere near where we were aimed to be, but we were over 80% every single day, which is a great distance away from other organisations. But in the slide I'll show you in a second, normally that week before winter, that week before Christmas is our best week, particularly Christmas Eve night. We're the healthiest we ever are, and we often are about 200 empty beds to help us get through the next 10 days or so, and that didn't happen this year. I'll show that in a second. So we ended up really, anything over sort of 50 or 60 in the ED is a big number, but we frequently or almost consistently had over 100 people in the department for most of the daytime. And at one point, the highest number was 142 people. That's kind of 3 times the healthy number of people in that department. And this is the reflection of that about bed occupancy. So, as I say, you can see where Christmas is. Normally, Christmas Day should be off the bottom of that slide. We had a really good pre-Christmas empty out, and then sure, the numbers go up across the next week with all the bank holidays and other things. But because of the things that happened that week before, the strikes, trauma, etc., we didn't have a good clear out. We weren't as healthy as we would have been on Christmas Eve, so we just ended up with a cumulative thing. The other bit about this is that it's just showing what we did around escalation. So we were using nearly every single bed we had available. And the 200 empty beds we talk about, a lot of those are elective, particularly elective orthopaedic beds, that would remain empty over the Christmas period because they're not being used for elective care, but we ended up into all spaces. So to just detail that. Decisions made at execs and at CEO level were to be escalating above levels we've ever seen before. So we have presented the winter plan here before, which was traditionally one elective orthopaedic ward. This year it was planned to be Hexham Ward 3. From the period after New Year for 2 to 3 weeks would be usually what we would ask for as a pulsed escalation space. We ended up having to go into that early between Christmas and New Year. And we ended up taking over Ward 8 at North Tyneside, which actually, in fairness, before Christmas had been switched from elective orthopaedics to trauma anyway, but we put some medical patients in there too. And we ended up on New Year's Day going into Ward 10 at 1 spec for a period of about 6 days, I think. But again, taking those elective beds and having medical patients in there, we then de-escalated from all those spaces really promptly. In NSEC, we ended up using overnight discharge lounge, which isn't normally open, and even the procedure lounge. So at one stage, adding all this together, including people waiting in ED, we had more than 100 people who were in not the right bed, if you like. They were in beds, they were getting care, but just to kind of give the numbers of extra people around. In medicine, we normally have 600 beds, so that you can see what a considerable increase that is. So that's detailing what did happen. What we've also done is very proactively try to look at what happened. We've reviewed data and safety incidents, we've reviewed people who died, and we've reviewed the patient experience data. As I said, there are definite examples where care wasn't to the standard that we would expect to deliver. Also very different from anywhere else in the country. So we had a few people who, 7 people in total, who we think that were waiting to be seen for more than 12 hours. That was a daily occurrence in many hospitals around the country. And so far, although we continue to look at this and we're not resting on our laurels at all, we've not seen any examples of significant incidents or preventable death that were clearly identifiable to the pressures. And that's a testament to the hard work and dedication of all the staff, but there's a reassurance in there as well. So in summary, it's been one of the hardest winters, particularly that particular period. It's required unprecedented escalation, also de-escalation, and to be honest, this week we're in times that we can't recognise for January, but you know, you know, it's working. That we don't attempt anything. I didn't say anything at all, did I? Do not attribute that to me. That we know that this had an inevitable experience, issue on experience. People in corridors, people were having extended delays, and there's nothing we can say to that other than we acknowledge that and try to do everything we could do to mitigate and minimise that. And a massive thank yous to our teams for their professionalism, agility, and commitment to be able to. We continue to monitor for any harm, any learning from this. The key learning is we never want to do that again. But we can, and we have shown that we can flex in ways that we never thought we could do before. We think again we're tempting fate now. We're through the worst of the flu. The anticipated COVID thing didn't quite happen in the way that was thought to, whether that was all part of this and one virus beat another virus. We need to look forward because we're not out of the woods. We've got strikes coming, not just in healthcare, but in schools and other sort of things going to impact upon us. We've got Easter, we've got a plethora of bank holidays in May. And we just generally we know that we need to look at our models of care for urgent and emergency care to help us make sure that the most appropriate people are getting the right care in our hospitals, but that we're also providing care for others in other environments to make the space. That's my quick overview.
Big story at the top. Jimmy, you first.
Yes, so that was a really good summary, Simon. I think you described it very well. A really difficult set of circumstances, managed incredibly well, great agility and compassion. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that we didn't quite manage to match our usual standards and all that. So, and our staff are aware of that. As Judy pointed out earlier, you can see a bit of that in our staff experience stats, and in our interactions with people, you can see people are uncomfortable with that. The public, by and large, were very patient with us as well. I think so we should acknowledge that and thank them for their patience, then assure them that we're absolutely doing everything to make sure that we get through next winter in better shape and can withstand a similar shock if necessary. We won't be, it's not as bad as that, but we need to think about how we can withstand a similar shock and get organised around that. And as Simon said, it is early days, we're all frightened to see it, but we've recovered very well from that few weeks of extreme pressure. It can absolutely start again tomorrow, and we need to be very much alert to that. But I think the bounce back ability of our teams and the agility again is fantastic. We need to acknowledge that. And then just finally, it's all we're talking about this, especially talking about it publicly. I think it's absolutely necessary as an accountable public service that we're talking about it. We acknowledge the difficulties, acknowledge that we didn't quite manage to work completely perfectly in extremes, but when you stand back from it, you know what people managed to do in that kind of pressure is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Couple of comments. Moira first and then.
Yeah, I was just going to say we had a board development, I think, just after Christmas and heard in a lot of detail about some of the concerns, and really we're still in the thick of it then. We did a good session on Friday at Safety and Quality, went through all the mortality, all of the things that Simon's just described, and I think it gave us huge assurance. And you know, there's a lot on the press, and it's everywhere, isn't it, that NHS in crisis, and you do worry that the public are losing confidence, probably won't go along to A&E or won't go to their GP because they think, oh, they're too busy or whatever. But I do feel that people locally who I've spoken to have said, you know, people who did go through either Cramlington or North Tyne said actually it was excellent. Yes, we waited, but we expected to wait. But we were dealt with in a very professional way. So I mean, huge credit, and I think there's a group of non-execs. All of us have said to each other, you know, that you look at the staff experience, the patient experience in this time of real pressure, and I've worked NHS a number of years, and it's real credit. So, and also I think the openness and the timeliness is the other thing that I would say. It's all real time. We're still just in January. And we've all had probably 3-4 discussions about this, and I think that's real credit to the organisation.
Great presentation. I suppose several things. I suppose it's one of those things that our strength is the fact that actually our plans are adaptive, because I think you're entirely right that the plans we made actually didn't remotely look like they were going to fulfill. But it's that ability to change the plans on a very proactive basis, and that flexibility that the organisation and the staff had that actually meant that we came out of this well. One of the bits that I suppose this is mainly, just to reassure people, people talk about people spending a night in the procedures unit. Bernie and I did a report on the procedures unit. If you go around it, it is a fantastic environment. It would outstrip most wards in the NHS. So it sounds like we're giving them less than standard care, and I think sometimes the language we use doesn't reflect the reality. I know non-execs who have been to the ambulance corridor. It's not a corridor. And the words don't necessarily fit the description of what is actually there, and it's really just to reassure them. And Bernie and I's visit to the procedure, it's a fantastic bit where it would outstrip an awful lot of wards. So it was more to reassure non-execs that they were not being put in second-rate accommodation during this, but we don't want to use that procedures unit. It's there for procedures, and that function then can't take place when people are in his bed. So it's just partly for reassurance.
So I think we should also take an element of comfort that our staff have come forward and said quite openly that this isn't the standard of care we would normally provide. So whilst we can look at facts and figures around raw numbers, I think a lot of it is in the qualitative narrative that we either hear on the shop floor, wandering around, and or in the staff experience surveys that we're getting. I think it's important because they haven't, even in the madness that was the large volumes, they haven't lost sight of the standard of care that we would want to provide, and I think that is really important, and credit to them. It was, they wanted to treat people with the dignity and respect that they're used to.
Phil? Thanks, Chair. Yes, thanks again, Simon. It was excellent just hearing about the stories, and I think, as Moira alluded to, all of the non-execs recognise, I think, the tremendous performance you put in over very difficult circumstances. Interested partly in kind of the lessons learned piece, and maybe that's something we'll come back to at some point, but just a specific question relating to discharge allowance, and I think you mentioned it, we kind of kept it in overnight and so forth. I just wondered whether, and I know we don't necessarily want to plan to do that on a regular basis, whether that was something just in a wider sense can ever be used to alleviate on some of the discharge issues that we face on a more recurring basis. So just to comment on that.
So it's so the discharge allowance specifically is probably our main avenue of escalation in NSEC if we need it currently. I'm trying to avoid using the procedure unit for that purpose. Both of them are environments people can spend the night. They get toilets. They've got it's better than some of our Bayside wards. Is one way of putting it. Currently, although we're refurbishing them. Thank you very much for that. And so the problem is that actually, if we put new patients in there overnight, we would have the standard of care they need a post-day ward around the next day, so we need to organise some extra people to come in for that, which we've done. And then actually it's no longer available for the function of the discharge allowance the next morning. So this is always the tension. This is the constant thing that actually when we are over full, we're just not running as well as we need to, and then we need to run as better as ever to get out through tomorrow. So some of our anxieties around these things are about the individual patient care, but then also the overall flow issue, and that's where when we're talking about the bed numbers and the flow and all these sorts of things, that's how it kind of all adds up together. But the team at the discharge lounge have been brilliant. The team at the procedure unit were brilliant at the point where we needed to go there.
Good. But I think that last comment serves to underline the importance of discharge and the availability of packages from the local authorities over bank holidays. And that's a real pressure at the back end with this event. I think it's amazing that we found almost 100 beds beyond our plan in experience. And as Alistair said, there weren't just any beds, they were good, careful surveys and the like that.
You never want them to go.
Well, I did notice, I think of all the learning, there's still learning to be done, I'm sure you'll be back. But the key learning was don't want to go through that again. And that is what we've got to do to avoid that. So we're with you. And I think to Moira's comments, I mean, as a board, I think this is the 4th time we've looked at this in some detail, 3 of them with yourself. And we do appreciate that actually we travel together on this and we share it. And might be any help, we'll be worrying with you. So keep doing it. You're good.
So that appreciation and that again, I know the message to the teams from the board as well as from Jim, they've been really powerful messages. They're really important. People are going home knowing that their day didn't go as well as they wanted it to. They didn't provide the care they came to, and getting that assurance that we recognise that, but we know they're doing their best has been incredibly powerful. So thank you on behalf of them.
That will change. Keep it going. Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Right, so next we move into governance. A couple of items from Ross Wigan on CQC regulation and then general elections. Ross.
Thank you, Chair. This is just the regular report on stakeholder engagement as part of the CQC process. I think it's probably more important than ever to be really focusing on this, given some of the things sort of Simon and Jim and colleagues have said around winter pressures and performance and public perception. So I think this one's fairly straightforward. Just a couple of points I wanted to make. The outcomes of this are split sort of between the communications element and also the patient and staff experience. And just to reassure that Joe and I, both fairly new in post, are working really closely, regular one-to-ones, and I think we are seeing the benefit of that in terms of tying it all together. I think the second thing to point out is just a little bit in there about the colposcopy engagement that we've been doing, and that was a really different way of kind of engaging people, which came out from the health inequalities work, and I think shows how we're using the data that we've got and really following that through and trying to make a positive difference. So I'll pause there.
Can we just take a little moment, perhaps, one of the issues to expand the colposcopy thing, because that's something definitely from left field that quite impacted.
Yeah, I think the Department of Public Health take a lot of credit for what they've done with that. So it's really a proactive way of contacting women due for colposcopy who weren't previously coming for attendance, and obviously this is a cancer screening where there's already a concern, and as a result of that kind of proactive approach, we've seen a significant decrease in the level of women who are failing to attend. We've been better able to understand some of the rationale why they weren't able to go, so it's been partly an understanding because there are certain sectors of society who are finding it quite hard to go. It's been really powerful from that point of view. And I think the learning of that is about, it's a much better use of our resource because the appointments are being filled, but fundamentally it's much better for these women because they're actually getting the test that they need. And I think having learned from those processes, it's then how can we lift and drop that to other areas where we know there is a need, there's an offer, but it's not being accepted, to make sure that those offers, where it's really important for somebody's health, are actually viable and meaningful for the individuals, because actually making an offer that they can't actually come to, that they can't accept or isn't going to work for them, to a degree is a bit pointless, and we need to avoid that, and that's been some of the key learning from the project.
Joe?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add as well, I've had some involvement with Alison and Nicole, who've led that piece of work. And for me, it's an absolutely fantastic example of consulting with women and involving women in the solution. And I think, so we've been busy working with the team to write a blog because we really want to promote that type of way where we're engaging with people to understand the barriers and then working with them to co-produce the solution. So I just thought it was an excellent piece of work, and then looking at the impact that it had. So yeah, brilliant.
That's why I raised it. So thank you both for your input for that. It must be popular, Jeremy.
So I just want to big up the colposcopy team. It's a small team. They've had some very significant changes in the way they've needed to be staffed that are quite challenging. It's now led by a nurse, by background, who's our screening programme lead. They got an excellent report. A lot of it was to do with the work, but it's been it's really required an awful lot of input from their team. And as I say, it's a small team, but a very, very important service, and you'll be hearing more from me about them as well.
And others. That's really, really good, really encouraging out of the box. Thank you. Ross, will you?
Yeah, the next paper again is pretty straightforward and just highlights some of the dates and deadlines for the next set of governor elections will take place in the summer. And there's a detailed kind of communication plan and a lot of planning going on through the membership committee. But this sets out the dates and ultimately the declaration of the results on the 30th of June.
It's an important part of our constitution. The governors are very active in this trust to manage as well as we do without. Get the elections done. Thanks. Anything else for us? No? Okay, we'll move on. Next one, I think, are mostly simply to note escalation from board committees. Anyone wants to speak up on any of them? Nursing midwifery report. It's taken. Okay. And safety and quality, I think we referred to that a couple of times. They're very active and very determined in last Friday. And the financial report, all really is on track.
Everything on track, on target. Just to highlight that we've secured funding for the outstanding element of the board this year, so that will deliver our ability to deliver the financial target service for 2016.
Just talking about the pay award, we continue to be disrupted by stress inside and outside. It's another challenge, a bit like winter challenge, so we have to ride that. Okay, anything else on those items? Any other business? We've got agenda for the next meeting. As ever, that may well change. Good. Anything anyone wants added to the agenda for next time, let me know, and let Laura know. Just looking, I think we've had a good session. I think the most important thing for me is when Simon came in the room, a lot of us were ready for it and understood a lot of it. It's good to hear it again. Slightly different language, slightly different update. I thought child health was really good. It sparked interest, which we would, I kind of wonder why. Something instinctive about that, but we do worry about children affected, mental health affected during lockdown. That was one of the key messages. And that could be a continuing question. I thought the walkabouts were interesting. Reception. We should remember to say thanks to those guys. Reception, all receptionists. They do a great job. And I don't know what we can do about getting people upstairs on this show. It doesn't feel right to me somehow. So I think it was a good meeting. Any other business? Leave it there. We're done. Thank you.